All right, welcome to day one of the Four Costly Card Investing Mistakes course, where we are going to dive into mistake number one. We're going to talk about what the mistake is, why it's a mistake, and what you can do differently to change your results. And so this one is fun because there are really two prongs to this one. It's the first one's pretty obvious once you know it or once you've gone through it and lived it. Like you certainly will understand why it's a mistake. But the second piece to it is a little bit sneakier, and I'll explain why in just a moment here. But without further ado, let's get into the first mistake, and that is relying on luck. So, for starters, anytime that I'm investing in a card, I want to make sure that I have as much control over what that card is as possible. And so, the first way that we see relying on luck kind of coming out in the card market is buying into box breaks, buying packs, going to your local Walmart and picking up a box off the shelf and going home and opening packs hoping to get lucky. Guys, hoping is not a strategy. And anytime that you need to get lucky in order to win, that's just not sustainable. Okay. So the way that breaks work, the odds are stacked heavily, heavily, heavily against you. The card companies always win. The break operation is going to always win as well. And so that leaves you as the one that's taking on all of the risk, right? And that's fine if that's what you want to do, but just know that you're going to lose money over the long haul if you continue to open pack after pack after pack. The odds are just stacked so heavily against you. So it's kind of like scratching off a lottery ticket where yeah, you're going to break even every now and then. You might make a little bit here and there. Sure, there's a jackpot that they advertise at the top of the ticket that maybe someone wins, but most of the time you buy one of those things, you're setting money on fire. It's very similar when you're opening packs. And don't get me wrong, I love opening packs. Super fun. This is, takes me back to my childhood. That's what I was doing, thinking I was being a strategic investor from a young age. And really what I was doing is just buying random packs and ending up with random cards. And guess what happens when you have random cards? You get random results. And that's not what we want if we're trying to build a predictable and consistent income in the card world. So buying packs simply is not a sustainable strategy. In fact, I would argue it's probably not a strategy at all. If it is a strategy, it's the worst one out there because it just leaves everything completely up to chance. The other thing I'll say about this, you see all these break operations, these card companies posting the big cards that come out of packs on social media. You got to remember social media is a highlight reel, and those companies are incentivized to get you to buy into those packs or buy into those breaks because that is how they make money. And so when you see those big cards, they feel closer than they really are. They don't show you all the hundreds or all of the thousands of packs in between those big hits where someone just like you, just like me, bought into that break and lost all or most of their money. And it's a darn shame that that's how it is, but that's the way that the odds are stacked. That's how the math works. So just keep that in mind next time you're thinking about opening a box of cards. Sure, it's fun, but I look at it as an entertainment cost. If I'm ever going to open cards, I expect absolutely nothing in return, and it's certainly not part of my business strategy as a card investor. That is the first part of relying on luck. Now, the second one, this is the sneaky one. So this one feels strategic when you're doing it, but it's actually another version of relying on luck, and that is speculating on player performance. Now, I want to start off by saying you absolutely can make money by speculating on player performance if you get it right. It's just hard to get it right consistently. This is coming from someone who has done a lot of this over the years, and I've had a lot of success with this. But what ends up happening is even if you're right, you just don't know what the timeline is going to be before you can actually make that flip. So, when I'm talking about speculating on player performance, I'm talking about buying a card, expecting a player to go out and play a certain kind of way. And if they play well enough, their card values will rise and you have a profit window that you can sell and take your money. Simple enough, right? It makes sense in theory, but in practice, what actually happens is there is always a level of performance factored into card values. And so when you're buying a Patrick Mahomes card, you're not buying it, expecting him to throw for 12 touchdown passes. you're already knowing that he's capable of throwing 40 touchdowns, 50 touchdowns, being a Super Bowl contender year after year. He's already got Super Bowls. And, so you're paying for that. You're paying higher prices for a guy like him than some random backup quarterback, right? Like his cards are going to go for way, way, way more than that. And so that's the reason. It's because the card market already knows, to a degree at least, what he's capable of. And that is what is factored into values. So it's not just a game of buying the best players and, if they go out and play well, that's enough to make their values rise. No, it doesn't work that way. They have to play above the card market's expectations. If they don't exceed the card market's expectations, their values can't rise because we're already expecting him to go out and throw for 40 touchdowns. So when he does that, we knew he was going to do that. That's what we were paying for when we bought the card in the first place. So he's going to have to go out and throw for 50 touchdowns. He's going to have to throw for 60 touchdowns. It's just like, and it gets ridiculous quickly when you start to talk about these giant numbers. And that's why a lot of cards of a lot of players actually drop over time. There are very few players who really do rise over time endlessly. And it's typically the best of the best players, the best of the best cards in the highest grades possible that rise long term. At least historically, that's what the data tells us. But in the shorter term, it's just a tough game to try to play the flip game and get it right consistently. There are professional scouts who their full-time job is to scout talent, and they still get it wrong every year. You still see first-round picks that end up being busts pretty quickly sometimes too. So if they're getting it wrong, are we as casual or even serious sports fans somehow privileged enough? We're just better than them that we can predict the future with better consistency than a professional scout can? I don't know, guys. Like, if you can, great, more power to you. But just know that this strategy puts all of the burden on the player to go and play a certain kind of way, and that's a tough way to make a business because you have no control over what they actually do. And the key here is the can't miss prospects absolutely can miss. They can and they do. It happens. Like, some of the guys will go on to be great players. Some of them simply will not, though, and that's where you get burned. So when you're looking at ways to win in the card market, what I like to do is try to control as much of it as possible and not need to get lucky in any sort of way. I don't want to have to predict the future. That's where I leave my results up to chance. And anytime you do that, you're just going to be inconsistent. So we've covered what not to do. We've covered the mistake. We've covered why it's a mistake and the two different ways that we see this coming out in the card market. Now, what do we do instead? Because ultimately, like, we've got to change our behavior here, right? So instead of buying breaks, instead of speculating on players, what I see a lot of successful card investors doing and what I focus on myself is the strategies where I can directly influence the outcome. Because ultimately, I want to bet on my skill rather than hoping to get lucky and leaving it up to chance, right? And so there are a few different strategies you can use here, but the first one is looking for quick flip opportunities, or I like to call this the buying value strategy, where you understand the market price of a card, and depending on where the card is listed, the timing, sometimes errors with the listing, just what's going on in the market. You can find cards for less than they're worth and flip them very quickly for a profit based on just understanding the market and, putting in the work, the effort to find these good deals. They are out there. This is actually how I got on my feet in this market, was by scraping the market, looking for the card for $1, $2 and selling it for $5, $6 and just scraping a few bucks off the top. Because I didn't really start with much back in the day, but I had the time and the willingness to put in the effort. And that is how I kind of built up my initial budget. A second strategy is to grade. So anytime you send off a card for professional grading, you pay a fee. And if the card gets a high enough grade, some cards that can add a whole lot of value to them. And that's where you can buy a card ungraded, pay a fee to get it graded, and flip it for a profit. Now, there's a whole process to this, of course. That's the simplified version. Grading is a learnable skill, though. So it's one of the few proactive strategies in the card market because we control what cards we submit for grading and when we can actually submit them. So that gives us a lot more influence on the outcome, especially as we level up our skill in grading cards. The third one that I like to focus on is market timing. So the longer you hang out in this market, the more you'll start to see that there are patterns that repeat year after year after year. And it's a lot of times it's like on the way out of the season, you'll see values of cards, even good cards of good players, that kind of prices just soften a bit on the way out of the season as people turn their attention elsewhere. On the way into the season, everyone's excited again. Attention returns back to that sport, and you see values pick up, and the hype's all there for all the players going into the season. You know, who's going to do big things this year, and people are making their bets. And so you can actually get out ahead of the crowd, buy those cards, and then flip them before the season even starts by just understanding how market timing works. So there are strategies like that that we can implement to get ourselves a lot more control over the outcome. And those are the types of strategies that I like to use as someone who is trying to make a consistent income in the card market. Okay, we covered a lot today, so let's wrap this thing up. But watch your inbox, be on the lookout for tomorrow's email. We're going to cover another one of the big mistakes here for day 2, and we're going to give you a very usable framework that can help you level up your purchases as a card investor. So get excited, and we will see you there.